Welcome back to AM Northwest. You know, like many, our first guest didn't really see those who were living on the streets. And that was until he learned a childhood friend, an academic star from an upper middle class family, had been homeless for decades. Here to share that story, we welcome the author of Anything is Good, Fred Waitzkin. Fred, good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
So tell me about, you wrote a book, but you say it's a work of fiction, but really based on this former high school buddy of yours. Tell me about Ralph, your friend Ralph, who you guys were good friends in high school, got into trouble together, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, he was my best friend in high school, brilliant guy, smartest kid in the school. And, we used to hang out and always at my house. I didn't really know much about his family life, but he came to my house and we were very, very close, except he was a strange guy. He didn't play basketball or football. He wasn't interested in girls particularly. And he referred to himself as an alien, which I thought was really hilarious. And I kind of loved the idea of it. You know, he spoke of himself almost as if he was from outer space. And later on, I learned many things about him later on, among which when he was, when we were friends, he had a pet parrot. And he used to talk to the parrot. The parrot was his friend. A very unusual guy, but brilliant. By the time he was in college, he was already recognized as an important philosopher in the country.
Wow.
He was conferring with Saul Kripke, who was one of the two great living philosophers in the world. And he was an inventor. He invented things. A really brilliant guy and a wonderful guy.
So then how did he end up homeless? I mean, was he, I don't know, you tell me, how did he end up homeless?
Well, the first part of the book deals with that. You know, his family was quite wealthy, but his father made money illegally. He had a business partnership with a guy named Sammy the Bull Gravano, who's pretty well known for murder and robbery. And working with Sammy the Bull Gravano, his father acquired 14 office buildings in New York City. And Ralph really didn't know about the business of his father very much. But he lived in a very nice apartment in the on the Upper East Side, and he did his inventing. He worked on philosophical ideas and created inventions. And when his father's business fell apart because he was undercapitalized, everything was lost. All those millions of dollars were lost, and Ralph didn't have money to pay for the apartment. And his sister took him to Florida, and put him in a little room owned by a small house near Miami Beach. And he lived in a little room just large enough for a computer and a notebook. And he didn't get along with the cousin very well. And the cousin thought he was crazy. And he threw him out on the street one night with no shoes on, just a few pennies in his pocket, and broken glasses. And he lived on the street for the next 20 years.
So let me ask you this. You lost touch with him after high school, right? So what motivated you to try to find him?
Well, I didn't completely lose touch with him. He would call me collect every 2 or 3 years on the phone.
Okay.
And in fact, I was writing freelance journalism at the time. And in fact, about 10 years after, when he was homeless for about 10 years, I went down to Florida and I wrote a piece about him for the New York Times Magazine. But I didn't know much about him. And frankly, I was impatient with that. That's Ralph on the screen there.
Yeah.
When he was, and I was impatient with this life that he was living. Such a brilliant guy, and I couldn't figure out what he was doing on the street, and it just seemed like a waste of time. And then we shoot closer to the present, to about 3 years ago, and I was living in New York, which is where I live, and my two closest friends at the time died, one on top of very, very, very close to one another. And it was a very depressing time for me because I loved those guys. I hadn't spoken to Ralph for 2 or 3 years. I didn't know if he was still alive, but I called him on the phone, got him, and I said, you kind of dropped that off the face of the earth for a bunch of years. Why don't you tell me what you were doing, what it was all about? And he told me this story, and this phone call led to about 20 or 30 other phone calls because he told me this most remarkable story I'd ever heard in my life. And that's where the book was born, from those phone calls.
It's incredible. You talk about how he was basically a counselor to other homeless people, like meeting them on a bench and talking with them, going through their troubles, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for the first couple of years that he was homeless, he was depressed and he almost starved to death. But after a while, when he got his feet underneath him and he learned how to live the homeless life, how to find food in trash containers, and he he started having conversations with other homeless people, and everyone realized immediately they were dealing with an exceptional man. He was homeless, but he was exceptional. He was brilliant, and he was empathic, and he gained a reputation for being a sage. And for many years, um, he would sit on a bench, and other guys would sit on benches waiting to talk to him, and they would tell him his problems, and he would be very helpful to them. And then later on later on in the book, the story takes a turn. He meets a woman and he falls in love with her, and falling in love with the woman on the street in a homeless community is very dangerous because other men wanted to take her from him.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do bad things to her, and he couldn't defend her. So he took her away. And they migrated to a different area of Florida to the north. And he had this really crazy idea that maybe they could live together, but they had no money. But he found a fishing pier in Pompano Beach, Florida, a pier that went out a quarter of a mile into the ocean. And living under the pier, on the one hand, would seem like an awful thing because there were rotting fish down there and spiders, and it smelled horrible. But he loved her. He fell in love with her. She was Chinese and she couldn't even speak English. But he fell in love with her, and he devoted himself to her, and he started to teach her English, and they had a really remarkable relationship for a while it lasted.
Fred, this story is amazing. I love it. And you say it's based on this true life man, but it is fiction. We want to mention again, the book is titled Anything is Good. Fred Waitzkin, thank you so much for taking I wish we had more time. This is fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed our talk.
You bet. We'll be right back with more AM Northwest. Don't go away.